live.
Okay. I'd like to call to order the Tuesday, June 14th, the 2022 work study meeting. Would everyone please stand? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, and then we have to do roll call. Director Asner, Director Byers, Director Faulkner,
Here.
Director Hudson, Director Mulder,
Here.
Vice President Petroff, here, President Cuneo.
Here.
We have a quorum. Before we start our monthly SSD Board of Education work study, I'd like to take a moment to remind the audience and the directors of the board of the work study process. The work study is a time to receive information from SSD leaders. We have 20 minutes set aside for each presentation and 20 minutes for the Board of Education to ask questions. In the event that we are approaching the 20-minute marker, I will alert the group when there is 5 minutes left. We ask that at that time, the presenter finish up in the allotted time, and that the Board of Directors asking questions to finalize their questions. This is in respect for all the Board of Directors and SSD leaders required. 2.01 is the recognition of Juneteenth and Pride Month, so I have no reading. Proclamation recognizing Juneteenth, June 2022. During the month of June, communities throughout the county recognize Juneteenth, which provides an opportunity to promote awareness of the holiday celebrated annually on June 19th, commemorating the end of slavery in the United States. Whereas the month of June is the time that many of our nation recognize Juneteenth as the holiday that celebrates Emancipation Day. On June 19, 1865, the day in history where the last state ratified the Emancipation Proclamation. And whereas this date marks the period of time where African Americans in Galveston, Texas, one of the most remote parts of the Confederacy, received notice from President Lincoln that slavery had been abolished, and declaration was codified in the 13th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States of America. And whereas June 19th also marks the day that African Americans in the southern states exercised independence from those who benefited from their labor in the founding of this nation. And whereas the educational institutions of this nation, including special school districts, have the responsibility to recognize the painful realities of our history and to make sure that our curriculum reflects these realities. And whereas the Board of Education stands firmly on all forms of racism and committed to providing equitable opportunities for all SSB students, staff, and families. Whereas on June 2021, the United States Congress approved a bipartisan bill to approve Juneteenth as a federal holiday, with unanimous vote in the U.S. Senate and nearly unanimous in the U.S. House of Representatives. And the bill was signed into law by President Biden on June 17, 2021, and be it resolved that the Board of Education recognizes June 19th, or Juneteenth, as it is the official holiday within the special school district to commemorate and celebrate the end of slavery in the United States. Be it further resolved, June 19th shall be a paid holiday for special school district 12-month employees. When June 19th falls on a Saturday, the holiday will be observed on the preceding Friday, and when it falls on a Sunday, the holiday will be observed on the following Monday. We have finally resolved the SSD Board of Education is proud to recognize Juneteenth as an official SSD holiday and urges the schools and communities to develop customs and traditions to commemorate and celebrate this important holiday appropriately. Okay. Now, LGBTQ plus Pride Month. June is the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer questioning LGBTQ plus Pride Month, which provides the opportunity to honor the obstacles and strides of the LGBTQ plus community, including the students and staff of our school district who identify as LGBTQ+. Whereas, in the movement towards equal rights for the LGBTQ plus people, A historic turning point occurred on June 28th, 1969 in New York City with the onset of the Stonewall riots. During these riots, LGBT citizens fought against the discriminatory criminal laws that have since been declared unconstitutional. And whereas LGBTQ+ Pride celebrations take place annually around the country to commemorate the beginning of the Stonewall riots and the birth of the modern LGBTQ+ rights movement. And whereas many students, family members, school staff, and district residents are a part of the LGBTQ community, and they contribute greatly to the enrichment of our community. And whereas the Special School District of St. Louis County upholds the commitment to creating and welcoming, inclusive, and affirming environment that embraces and values diversity of all students and staff identities. And whereas SSD condemns hateful language and actions based on gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation. Everyone should be able to live without fear of prejudice, discrimination, violence, or hatred based on their gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation. And that should be acknowledged at all levels of public education. And whereas youth who identify as LGBTQ+ face an increased bullying and are almost 5 times more likely to have attempted suicide compared to the youth who identify as non-LGBTQ+. And whereas the SSD Board of Education is committed to helping end the crisis of bullying and suicide in our schools and community. Whereas Policy AC provides guidelines for the equal opportunity for an equitable, safe, and inclusive environment, and it is the intent of the SSD Board of Education that every policy, practice, and procedure shall reflect the commitment. Whereas the cisgender and heterosexual teachers and staff will be supported as they act as allies for the LGBTQ+ students, staff, and extended community. Whereas students and staff who identify as LGBTQ+ will be able to express themselves authentically and be celebrated for who they are. Therefore, it will be resolved that the the Special School District of St. Louis County Board of Education does hereby declare the month of June LGBTQ+ Pride Month. Hooray! All right. We will start the agenda at 3.01, the extended school year and summer program update.
Good evening, Vice President Podjoff, Board of Directors, Dr. Keenan. My name is Kelly Drink. I'm the Executive Director of Schools and Programs, and I'm with, good afternoon, evening, I'm Chiquita McBriddle, Chief of Partner District. Thank you for having us. Tonight we're going to give you an update on extended school year and summer programs. Through this presentation, you should be able to understand the current status of both in the SSD schools and in the partner districts. Next slide. First, we want to talk about a little bit about the fact the rates that we're paying staff to work for extended school year and summer programming. Those have been raised. They were raised through negotiations last year. So paraprofessionals received a $4 raise from 16 to 20, and teacher level staff moved from 29 to 36. This was an attempt to compensate our staff fairly and also to entice staff to work in the summer to support us. Next slide, please. Good evening. The information you have before you shows you the information of eligible students as well as those students who are attending special extended school year programs in our partner district schools. As you can see, many of our families have taken on this opportunity to ensure that their students are able to continue to engage in programs and services throughout the summer. Next slide. The next slide also shows additional information for those partner districts. Again, it is outlined by those students who are eligible, but also those students who are attending. Next slide. We've also provided for you the dates and times of each of our partner districts and the programs that are being offered. These are programs outside of extended school year, and we consider them to be partner district summer programs. And so you may see the acronym PDST moving forward. Of all 22 districts, there are only 2 districts who are not providing extended programs other than extended school year programs this year, and that is Hackneyville and I believe Valley Park. Next slide. You can see that information here. Next slide. When we talk about partner district summer programs, these are summer programs, again, that are offered by the partner district. And we want to ensure that we are in collaboration with those partner districts, ensuring that we provide additional support to students who may receive service throughout the year who would like to attend those programs. We want to ensure that they're non-competing. We want to ensure that students who are eligible for ESY still also have access to those partner district summer programs that may take place within a partner district. And we know that there will be times when those programs will overlap. And we want to ensure that we still provide our students with opportunities to participate in both and to ensure that we collaborate with those partner districts to ensure that we're able to do that. Students with IEPs, again, they may participate in those programs, and when appropriate, we will ensure that we provide our staffing to support. Next slide.
In our SSD schools and programs, we have extended school year at Ackerman, Litzinger, Southview, Northview, New Warner, and VSP. We have summer programming in the afternoons at Ackerman, Litzinger, Northview, Southview, and New Warner. Transportation is provided, as we are also providing breakfast and lunch for our students. Next slide, please. This gives you a breakdown of the number of students that we are eligible by building. We also included early childhood and purchase of service and home numbers on there for you. And it gives you the number of students that were signed up to attend. So it's about 75% of our students are eligible to attend ESY. Attendance runs about 75 to 80% a day of those students that are eligible. Next slide, please. Again, I talked about meals, and then with our afternoon summer programming, this year we went with Summer Journey, partnering with Summer Journey for our curricular materials, and we're really focused on enrichment and STEM. So a lot of the feedback we got from families and students were that they didn't want an extension of extended school year in the afternoon. They wanted more of a camp-like opportunity. So as you can see there, we've listed some of the opportunities: drones, rockets. They're doing podcasting, planting, cooking. So a lot of hands-on activities that students are very engaged in. The staff really seems to also enjoy the material. Next slide, please. So we do have some low enrollment in some of our programs, which we anticipate. Some families just choose not to send their children to summer school. They need a break. Sometimes there's transportation concerns. Some may be attending camps in the community, family vacations. Some families still are not comfortable sending their children back to school. So we have some students that are choosing not to attend for that reason. And then just a difference in staff or familiarity sometimes between who's there during the school year and who's working in the summer. Next slide, please. Do you have any questions for us? Thank you.
So pardon me. Thank you for that. I'm curious how you gathered that feedback at the end. How did you gather that feedback from the community members?
When we surveyed for interest last year, when we were talking about starting summer programming, when families chose not to participate, they gave us feedback on why they were choosing not to participate. In addition, because our schools are really very small, we have a lot of informal conversations with families, so we just seem to gather a lot of information in that way. A lot of it's anecdotal.
What's the difference between last year and this year's enrollment?
I think it's about the same.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is 3.02, Curriculum and Assessment Report and Finance.
Thank you, Vice President Contract, Board of Directors, and Dr. Keenan. My name is Molly Moulton, and I am the Executive Director of Teaching, Learning, and Accountability. First report tonight will be the Curriculum and Assessment Report for this next school year. Next slide. The purpose of this report is to present curriculums that were up for review or writing this year. as well as the updated course guides for both our special education schools and our technical schools, and our assessment plan. So just a quick reminder about the difference between curriculum and instruction. So curriculum is the what, not necessarily the how we teach things, but the what we teach. Having a curriculum provides continuity across our schools, so it doesn't matter which school you're accessing of ours, you would be covering the same curriculum. And it really stems around what we want our students to know and be able to do at the end of that course, at the end of that year. It's definitely a guide for student success, and it helps us to ensure that we're meeting all of the state standards. Instruction is more about how you teach. And so with that, we look at differentiation, and we look at how to best meet students' needs. And then we utilize our materials through that instructional process to teach the curriculum. Both are very important, and both affect student learning. So we want to make sure we're using high leverage practices as well as good content. So this is just kind of a graphic to show how things kind of run together, how they cross over to impact student learning. So we have to have that curriculum, we have to have the instructional pieces, as well as the assessment to know that our students are getting what we think they're getting. And all that comes together to make students learn. So just a reminder of what our goals were in the curriculum division this year. So the first is really looking at reviewing and regularly updating our curriculum for both the special education schools and the technical schools. And so the strategy we've done for that is we have developed a curriculum review process. And we have a review calendar where we have courses that will be reviewed on a 4-year cycle for our special education courses and a 5-year cycle for our career and technical schools. This graphic shows you a little bit about the curriculum process. So we pull together a curriculum review committee. Oftentimes that is teachers who volunteer or maybe teaching that content area. We also seek the input of administrators to make sure each school and each course is well represented. We then look at the data. That data includes feedback from teachers as well as our student results. And also this year, as you'll hear in our program monitoring report a little bit later, we are also incorporating student voice, where when we are getting ready to review a curriculum, we will survey the students that took that course the year before and use that data as input for those review committees. We also look at the alignment between our curriculum and the state standards to see if there's been any significant changes in the state standards that would require a curriculum review as well. If we feel like the curriculum is in a good place, then we move forward and readapt that curriculum. If there are things we need to change based on that feedback, based on our data, then we go in and make those changes. Once we revise that curriculum, we then take it to stakeholder feedback. That stakeholder feedback includes administrators, teachers who did not serve on the committee, as well as the community, including our families. After that stakeholder review, we then go back and make revisions as necessary, and then we bring it to you, the Board of Education, for approval. Once the board does approve that, then we begin the cycle of training our staff and implementing the curriculum. Next slide. So this year, you received in a Friday packet the list of courses that were reviewed or written this year. So as you can see here in our special education schools, we reviewed our math curriculum, as well as personal finance, character education, and social emotional learning. Social emotional learning was actually a holdover from last year because we used the CASEL standards, and those standards were revised in the spring of last year. So with that revision, we chose to hold those and take some time this year to ensure we were in alignment with the new CASEL standards. Next slide, please. Also in our career and technical education program, you can see the reviews we had here. So automotive tech, our senior carpentry program, design and entrepreneurship, the senior curriculum for electrical trades, construction and outdoor maintenance, and HVAC. We also wrote the multimedia curriculum. for this year. Goal 2 is really talking about reviewing materials and adopting materials to help support teaching our curriculum. So we look at a review cycle for our different programs, as well as making sure that that's done in the special education schools and the technical schools. We also had our centralized purchasing process developed last year, and it did go through our process improvement for this year for implementation. So the resources that we looked at this year for the special education schools were our K through 5 ELA curriculum materials, in which we chose to continue with McGraw-Hill, with Overport, and Wonders to support our ELA curriculum. In our career and technical schools, you can see we did look at some new resources for some of our programs in that area as well, and those are listed on the slide. For our course guides, which you received as an attachment in your board packet, special education courses, we have no changes in courses this year, so that is the same as it was last year. In our career and technical course guide, we did eliminate some of our academic courses as we are fading out the full day program with that. We do have our academic integrations, which will stay, but some of those standalone academic courses were no longer needed. And we also added the multimedia course, which is a course for us into our course guide for this year. Next slide, please. And then our assessment plan, which was also included in your packet. According to board policy and DESE, we update that every year. And the thing that was really added to this plan this year was we got very specific on how we disseminate the results of those assessments to our families. And so you'll see an additional column on how we're completely sharing that information with us. Questions that you might have?
I have one too.
Sure.
In our multimedia, what is that consisting of?
So it is consisting of several different pieces. We used a community advisor that Kevin Haggart recommended, and so it has lighting, it has different forms of photography as well as video. It has editing components of that. So there's several different pieces. And you are able to access that on MBAR, which is our curriculum platform, and I can definitely help you with that if you'd like.
The other one is, I see this design and entrepreneurship.
Yes. So that's a course that we've had for quite a few years, and this was just a review cycle. Looking at making sure we're staying up to industry standards, and making adjustments more based on the feedback of the instructor, some things to update or change. And then again, that would go through our community advisor.
So when we say design and entrepreneurship, again, I'm trying to wrap my head around a student thinking that, and you say that we're going to be dealing with advisors.
We have community advisors. Mr. Ader, could you talk to those specific advisors that we have?
So as Dr. Bolton was referring to, each of our individual programs has a technical advisory board. So it's industry representatives who work in those fields currently, who provide feedback to what it is that we should and should not be teaching in our programs to prepare people for employment. And so making sure that we are staying industry relevant in each of our areas. So every program has a program advisory board. So whenever we go through a curriculum review cycle, that group, we tap into them to get their feedback as we're developing the curriculum. The Design and Entrepreneurship program that we have is coded as an industrial design course with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. So it's really focused on that industrial design lens, where they get into design thinking, they get into product development, working everything through patenting process and prototyping process, manufacturing process, and that's really the focus of that program in Design and Entrepreneurship. We're also utilizing components of the National Federation for Teaching Entrepreneurship's curriculum is also interwoven into that curriculum for design entrepreneurship. So you kind of have those two pieces, industrial design and the National Federation for Teaching Entrepreneurship curriculum is interwoven within that as well.
So is there any finance involved in that?
Absolutely. So it's, we actually had a pitch competition that students were competing in recently where we had a student who actually earned $2,000 to put towards their prototype competition that St. Louis University had. So we get into how do you handle venture capital financing? How do you handle loans and financing from that side? And how do you move from idea to concept to product to business?
Yeah, Dr. Bolton, thank you, Kevin. And thank you as well for this. I'm curious about slide number 12, you mentioned the assessment plan and determination of results.
Yes.
Has been added. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yes. So for each one of our assessments, we talk about how we will share those results with our families within a certain time frame, and how what we're working with our teachers and our staff on is being able to help explain those results to families or present them in a very family-friendly way, so that our families, we spend time out of the school day to assess students, and we want to make sure our families understand the results of those tests and what our next steps might be for those students.
Via email, or is that?
Actually, we look at how the family prefers to be communicated with. So many of our teachers do a survey at the beginning of the year to ask our families what is the best way to communicate with you, and we typically follow those communication protocols.
Any other questions? Thank you. Next on our agenda, 3.03, Professional Development Committee Plan, Report, and Budget for 2022-2023.
Good evening, Vice President Patrick, Board of Directors, Secretaries. My name is Molly Wilson. I am the Executive Director of Teaching Learning and Accountability. And with me tonight, I have Tina Maxey, who is the Director of Professional Learning. We are here tonight to present to you the Professional Development Plan update from this past year and the projected budget for next year. So really just want to remind the board of the responsibilities that DESE has assigned to you in regard to the Professional Development Committee and the Professional Development Plan. So the board does approve that plan and ensures that the implementation of that plan is meeting our staff needs as well as our students' needs. And also to ensure that we have a beginning teacher program that involves mentoring that is aligned to the state guidelines. So we often call the Professional Development Committee the PDC Committee. So DESE defines that committee as working in partnership with our building leaders as well as you as the board, and utilizing those standards of professional learning to ensure that we are having high-quality professional learning for not only individuals but team schools as well as the district. In setting the policy, organization, organizing, providing, facilitating, managing, and participating in monitoring and measuring professional learning. Really, we're looking for that impact on educator effectiveness so that our professional learning is impacting our educators, which then positively impacts our students. Right. This committee is made up of representatives that are selected by their peers, and we have partner districts, SSD schools, low incident providers, and the ST, as well as technical education and early childhood education that sit on the PDC committee. There is a regulation that was passed in the 2019-2020 school year that these funds can only be used for teacher level staff. However, we do within our budget a lot in our regular budget, if you will, for professional learning, a lot for professional learning for our other groups as well. Next slide, please. So through DESE, we allocate 1% of our district's foundational program, and that excludes add-ons, but that 1% is then dedicated to the Professional Development Committee. Of those monies that are allocated, we need to spend 75% of that within that fiscal year. And then a report we do that has our proposed budget as well as our goals and how we've met those goals is presented to staff every year. So Ms. Mache is going to go through our goals and how we expended our money this year as well as our results. Next slide, please.
Good evening. So as indicated, I'll be sharing with you the evaluation of the 3 Professional Development Committee goals, as well as what you have in some of the tables are the expenditures related to those goals, the costs, and then some information or results that we're experiencing from those differing activities. So for this first goal, it was aimed at improving student performance in the area of literacy, numeracy, and social emotional learning and behavior. And some of the activities funded through the Professional Development Committee this year in the area of literacy is what you see here on this slide. And that included a foundational literacy program called LETTERS. And so there were training and materials associated with that professional learning event, as well as Wilson and the Strategic Instruction Model, or SIM, as 2 of our Tier 2, Tier 3 interventions. And lastly on this slide is the expenditure associated with FastBridge, our progress monitoring tool for the district. Next slide, please. This represents the funded activities of the Professional Development Committee in the area of math, and again, a foundational program called Numbers that is provided to our staff, selected staff, as well as one of our Tier 2, Tier 3 interventions, Number World. In the area of Number World this year, we were not only able to provide that training for staff that in alignment with their partner district's professional learning plan, but we were also able to grow, if you will, 5 of our math coaches so that moving forward, we'll be able to provide that professional learning in-house as well. Next slide, please. In the area of behavior, the Professional Development Committee continues to fund our nonviolent crisis intervention program, and so that covers the cost of materials for teacher-level staff, for classroom teachers, as well as for teacher-level certification, recertification. We added 1 teacher-level staff NCI instructor this school year, as well as our NCI instructors who provide training outside of contract hours are paid that workshop stipend, and so those costs are included funds as well. And lastly, in that kind of table marked as other, those represent the individual, whether it be professional learning that's requested or materials that are requested directly to the Professional Development Committee that are approved by the leadership team, and those would be in the areas of literacy, numeracy, social emotional learning, and again, whether that be conference attendance or materials. And so for Goal 1, and those expenditures totaled a little less, or a little more than $376,000 this year. Next slide, please. So in terms of results, what we aim to achieve is, again, is helping students grow in those areas, and we monitor those interventions by in-program measures. And so for the student data submitted this school year, a little more than 93% of the student data submitted indicated a growth of more than 20% over baseline. So again, taking that pre to post measure assessment for those interventions. Goal 2 of the Professional Development Committee is to fund activities that support our induction program, the New Teacher Academy, that all of our new hire staff participate in. And that aim, as you might imagine, is to help develop and accelerate the growth of our new hire teachers. Some of the activities funded this year were our 3-day new teacher orientation program to kind of kickstart that learning, growth, and development. And then throughout the course of the year, we funded materials for our classroom learning system, so for continuous classroom improvement, teacher-student partnerships. as well as we had some teachers select to attend training last July to help them be ready for the school year, so we see the stipends through PDC for that. We contributed to some new teacher kits, again, with the goal of preparing teachers, making sure they have materials needed to get started on the right foot. We contributed $9,000 towards those kits. And then we have 154 school-level mentors this year for new teachers, and their associated stipends for providing that support are listed there as well. So those expenditures total nearly $124,000 of our PDC budget for Goal 2. Next slide, please. So in terms of the goal, what we want is for our teachers to demonstrate those skill sets, those foundational skill sets for providing universal support, getting their classroom learning systems up and running effectively, as well as high leverage practices. We want them to be a level of proficiency or have 85% mastery on those skill sets. While induction is a 2- and 3-year program, this is where our year 1 teachers are sitting currently. So in terms of universal support, there was a measure taken in October, October 21, and it was 49% of those universals were in place. Much coaching and support has been provided since then, and so when that measure is collected again this fall, the fall of 2022, we would anticipate much movement in that area. In terms of some of those high leverage practices for specialized instruction and related to a positive classroom learning environment and use of explicit instruction, we're nearing that mastery. We're continuing to coach folks in those areas, but we're getting close. And then classroom learning systems, that is a professional learning event that most teachers are taking in the spring. So they haven't had a whole lot of time yet to get to that highly sophisticated level of implementation. And so at this point in time, as of May 30th, 41% of our year 1 teachers are making progress, but may not have all of the steps in place just yet. Next one. And lastly, a goal of the PDC is to ensure that we continue our commitment to having an effective professional development committee. And so given the charge of the committee, which is to attend 3 meetings a year, and help support staff in the district or the department seek out and get funding for necessary materials and conferences. They help facilitate that process and in turn help ensure that we see the impact of those efforts and submit those artifacts within that too. So the cost for those stipends for those PDC committee members totals $3,000 this year. This year, our results, we were a little bit lower than in previous years in terms of teachers submitting those artifacts that really show evidence of how they use that money to show growth and its impact on student learning. And so that is one area that we will continue to support, look for cycles of improvement and how we can best do that moving forward. In addition to that next step that I just described, additionally, we'll continue next year with working in partnership with administrators and our professional learning team to support literacy, numeracy, and social and emotional learning that benefits growth and development in students. And that will include those foundational trainings referenced earlier in the areas of literacy and numeracy. And then we will also continue that support for our new hire teachers through providing a rigorous induction program aimed at those 3 focus areas. Next slide, please. So then taking that a step further into a projected budget for the 22-23 school year, I believe in your packet you had a more detailed plan, but at a balcony level, we'll continue that goal and student performance with some of those activities that you see there. Then again, some projected costs for our induction program, and then once again, being able to provide stipends for our PDC committee for their leadership, which we project at this point in time would be in this area of $579,164. regarding this data.
The first being, goal one, that 93.3% of students take growth, which is great. How does that compare to non-COVID years? Like I would have expected. But compared to non-pandemic years, are we usually at that 93%? Are we lower? Are we higher? How did the pandemic affect it?
So I think how the pandemic is impacted is probably more related to the amount of data that we've received. So in previous years, our count of student data submitted would have been much higher. Our percentage of submitted data this year was lower, and many of the causal factors related to that were just slower implementation, and really just happening to sub, so not being able to implement the program as designed, and those types of factors that you would expect.
And then, you were saying that we had a lower, only 67% of teachers provided the information. Are we thinking that's, again, pandemic-related burnout, or are we usually that low and we're trying to get normalization, or where are we at with that? Is that lower than usual?
It is lower than usual. And some of the things that we're looking at and we want to pay attention to is how can we get that evidence without having to ask our teachers to put that information in one more place or submit it to one more group. So you probably hear that when we talk about workload and those types of things. So we've got some retooling to do to figure out another mechanism for doing that.
Right. Okay, so instead of putting the same data in 5 different
Correct. Yes. That component, and we did have the majority of our requests came in the later parts of February and March, which then again slows the turnaround time as I take my learning, implement it, and give the student results.
Okay. Any other questions?
I do. Thank you for the presentation. I've got a question. I think that a lot of taxpayers would ask, are we getting the right bang for the buck for some of these costs? Trainings. I'm curious about the turnout of teachers attending, how many eligible are actually attending. And that you mentioned golden mines as far as participation.
We are close, especially for those foundational trainings, which is the majority of the budget funded by PDC. So when we talk about letters and numbers and the foundational pieces, those have a cap on them of 40 participants in each one of those. And so annually we start at that cap. We might have, a couple of folks that need to drop from that training. So we do fill those, and in fact we have a wait list for next year for the numbers training. Moving forward next year, we also are breaking apart elementary and secondary for the literacy, again, so we can get each one of those to 40. Again, so we can bring the learning to as many teachers as possible each year within that. And then we're continuing to monitor. Last year was the pilot for these programs, and so we're continuing to monitor, again, with that question of, are we seeing those results? So that's where we're are getting those data on those observations from administrators, say, what are you seeing in those classrooms that are letting us know the teacher feedback on how's implementation going, what's easy about the program, what's hard, and how can we help.
So the costs are determined by the cap, is it?
So yes, the cost is, there's an overall cost for the cohort that goes up to 40 participants, and that's because we have an outside vendor providing that training at that level.
I think the only thing I'll add is, we are changing our literacy training this year. Our vendor for letters training has changed their format to be, there are 6 different modules, and it's going to, the way they've changed the training is to have teachers work in a more asynchronous or on their own online environment and then come together. It was 12 hours per module, and we just felt like that was too much to put on our teachers. So we researched some other options, and we're going with Keys to Literacy, which we have several states that their Department of Education have adopted that, and they are in person. And feedback, we've done the letters training for 2 years. Last year and this year, last year it was totally virtual with our participants being virtual as well, and they did not really like that. They didn't feel that was quite as effective. They did learn things, but they just didn't feel like it was quite as effective. This year, we brought our participants in, but our presenters were virtual because our companies were not allowing them to travel because of the COVID rate. And we got better feedback, but still, they wanted that in person with the presenter. And so, Keys to Literacy will provide that. And also, we got some feedback from the letters training that they mixed the elementary and secondary folks together, and sometimes our secondary folks really felt like the information did not apply to them because it was only elementary skills. So, hence, like Tina said, we're dividing those two trainings. So, we're really taking that opportunity to use that improvement cycle and really look for opportunities that will meet the needs of our teachers in a better way.
Right, did I catch correctly that there is a wait list for some of these programs?
There are, yes, and so right now we do have a wait list for numbers. We actually have a phone call with the presenters this week to see if we might be able to add another section, because we are at a point where we could open up another section and we would fill it. Absolutely.
A couple of questions. Sure. First of all, thank you for the presentation. Is there a way that, and I know our para-training are hiring an individual that we train paras and do all of that. There, and I know, and I understand. Special development, they can't pay for that. Is there a way that we could link that information into this as just an extra, so it's not being paid for it? Still a development.
So I think that would come through our professional learning report. It could not come into this report because this report goes to the state, and the state says we cannot use those
I
funds.
just want to make sure that we got, credit for what we did.
Absolutely, absolutely.
The next thing I had was on I'm trying to figure out the numbers on this, okay? On the fast bridge, okay, page 6. Fast bridge screening was completed in fall 21 and spring 22. We increased 33% of that reading growth service has increased from 28% last year. 37% has growth in math, as opposed to 32% last year. But I went to our goal, okay? By June 2021. Those are figures that are supposed to be.
So that spring assessment is our last assessment for that year.
Okay, if that spring assessment says 28% one year and 33% last year.
That's the increase.
Right. But what is that? That doesn't go back to what we're measuring up here. Because we're seeing they are improved by 20% of the baseline.
Correct.
So I know that we should be able to do it from those numbers. Those numbers aren't telling me anything.
Correct. The 20% over baseline really is solely pulled from those specific interventions that are being taught,
Right.
not correlated down to, but
So what I'm saying, fast bridge, the numbers that we're getting in spring, fall, spring of 22, fall of 21, we're saying by June 2021, we're talking different timelines.
That was a typo. It should have been 2022.
Oh.
yeah.
She stated that at the beginning of the presentation. It was a
Sorry,
typo.
I missed that. Okay,
Sorry.
sorry. I was
That
trying
was
to
our
figure this
mistake
out.
with the typo.
Okay. I got you. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
That's a fair honor.
Any other questions?
Yeah, there was one slide in there, my copy, I'm not able to get to it. 8 or 9, if we bring it up, I appreciate it very much. Regarding the percentage of students with submitted data showing
Slide
by
slide 9.
yeah,
Oh, go back.
so that 93% of submitted, student data submitted, so a portion of the overall students. Implies that some data is not being submitted.
Correct. The exact numbers I can get to you, I don't have them in front of me. It just is not inclusive of if we're not at 100% in terms of student data being submitted. That is correct. If you want specific by those different trainings we offered, I can get that to you.
Appreciate that.
Of course.
We'll include that in your Friday.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda, 3.04, the program monitoring report, curriculum employee wellness, federal programs, food service, legal services, and compliance, and transportation.
Good evening, Vice President Frastra, Board of Education, Dr. Keenan. My name is Molly Wilson, and I am the Executive Director of Teaching, Learning, and Accountability. And with me, I have Dr. Matt Trevor, who is the Evaluation and Research Administrator. Next slide, please. So our purpose for this program monitoring, you might remember, we do this quarterly, bringing different programs that are monitored. This fulfills our DESE MSIP requirements for program monitoring and evaluation. And also, it helps us to inform our stakeholders of how we're doing as far as some of our key programs and their performance indicators. It also allows us to do a continuous improvement cycle on those programs and think about what next steps might be to ensure even higher results. The monitoring reports for this quarter that we will be bringing to you are curriculum, employee wellness, federal programs, food services, legal services and compliance, and transportation management. I'll now turn it over to Matt to go through those reports.
Appreciate the opportunity to present this final round of program monitoring reports to you tonight. All these reports were compiled by myself and my evaluation research colleague, Carla Reisner, in close collaboration with the individual managers of each of these programs. So the slide you see here is just a visual refresher of the content that is included in these monitoring reports. So each one includes a table. First column of that table lists a key metric or a key indicator that's included in the report. The second column is a performance target. The third column lists the year-over-year results that are available and that correspond to that indicator. These are color-coded, whereby results and/or trend arrows that are depicted in blue represent favorable results, whereas those depicted in orange are results that either did not meet a performance target and/or they exhibited a trend in the opposite direction of what we want to see. So then supporting details just provides brief information that could include details regarding the indicator or an explanation for the results that were observed. Each one of the reports does include a list of key improvement actions determined by the program. Next slide. So the initial summary is for curriculum. Obviously, Dr. Bolton talked quite a bit about curriculum earlier. This report does just cover curriculum for SSD schools and programs, including technical schools, that's correct. The first two indicators relate to just the extent to which curriculum reviews are completed per schedule. So over the last 3 years, all reviews have been completed for the schedule outlined. There were several instances, as Dr. Bolton mentioned earlier, where we delayed a curriculum review for justifiable reason. For example, we knew that new standards were coming out in the future, so it made sense to wait. The third indicator there pertains to satisfaction with the curriculum review process among teacher participants in that process. So I think ideally we want to see a little bit higher rate of satisfaction, and the chair for this report, who's Matt Glazer, who's our coordinator of curriculum for SSD schools, has put some things in place to address the concerns that staff have expressed. I think a lot of that satisfaction, the issues likely pertain to staff's inability to attend all of the curriculum planning sessions due to COVID-related issues. Next slide, please. So the employee wellness program is managed by our Director of Benefits and Risk Management, Brenda Julie Artis. Aetna provides funding for this program. You'll see it includes 3 indicators: participation, employee assistance program utilization, and then staff perceptions of employee wellness opportunities. So you can see for the first indicator, participation between the years 2019 and 2020 has increased pretty markedly. That followed the adoption of several online platforms, particularly the WellBeats fitness platform, which a lot of people have signed up for. With regard to the employee assistance program utilization, the target there continues to be met every year. SSD staff participate in the EAP at rates that are considerably higher than the industry average. So in 2021, I think SSD's participation rate was almost double that of what was typical in the education sector. The third indicator is based on the climate survey, which has not been administered since 2019, but the last time it was administered, almost 90% of staff agreed with that particular item that's listed there. The wellness program is exploring, at this point, alternative options for getting feedback from staff about their perceptions of wellness. Next slide, please. So this federal program report actually consolidates what was previously spread out into 4 separate reports, including homeless, migrant, English learner, as well as Title 1A. So those are now in one report. The federal programs is administered by Esther Scott, so we're looking for her on this one. With regard to the first indicator, federal programs is required to complete an extensive compliance checklist annually, even though it is actually reported only once every 3 years. It actually includes 64 annual requirements. And for each of the years, we've met those requirements at 100%. The second indicator pertains to students experiencing homelessness and how quickly we are able to establish transportation for those students once we learn of their homeless status. This has been a struggle this most recent year, given a variety of transportation challenges, but the program is exploring options for making this area. The second and third indicators relate to academic growth among students who specifically receive Title I services. So that 60% of students meeting the target listed there is actually a very ambitious target. So the growth exhibited by students didn't quite meet that target this year, though it is pretty strong relative to the historical performance of SSD schools. It's also been observed that all students almost in grade K through 8 actually did meet the target. So program staff are exploring why and how secondary students might be able to mirror that type of growth. The final indicator, it's sort of a placeholder there for English learners. It's still a work in progress. It represents an attempt to develop an indicator that gives us feedback on the effectiveness of our services provided to English learners. There's really a dearth of information out there that speaks to what districts should expect with regard to how much growth students who are English learners should make and how quickly they should make that growth. So we're continuing to work through that and research what's available out there and potentially just some tweaks to the way that we collect and manage data there can help us generate a metric that provides meaningful feedback on the program. Next slide, please. So food services, under the responsibility of finance division for SSD, they have 4 indicators. The first 2 indicators are based on surveys administered. I think that there is some interest moving forward in revisiting those surveys to make sure that the information from solicited is meaningful and actionable. The latter 2 indicators are basically compliance and safety reviews. So that third one actually has not been done for several years. It's on a 3-year cycle. All 10 of those corrective actions have been addressed and completed. And the food safety indicator, we've met that target each of the last 3 years at nearly 100%. Slide, please. So legal services and compliance is actually a new report this year that we've added to our schedule. Susan Henry oversees the legal and compliance office, so you'd probably say that she is the owner for the first 3 of those indicators. The first 3 indicators speak to outcomes of due process and child complaint findings as well as mediations. Though note that the number of mediations conducted over the last 3 years has been very small, ranging. With regard to those first 3 indicators, the recent results, I would say, have been fairly positive with the established targets being met most years. The fourth indicator is referred to as tiered monitoring. You'll sometimes hear this phrased as file review in SSD. I can talk a little bit about how this process works. So each of our individual partner districts and the SSD staff in those districts conduct tiered monitoring on a 3-year schedule, corresponding to one of the cohorts that they're assigned to among districts throughout the state. As part of this tiered monitoring, they complete a self-assessment of the extent to which a sample of IEPs and evaluation meets a very long set of compliance criteria or compliance indicators. So after this self-study is completed, DESE then completes what is called a desk review that reviews just a subsample of files that were reviewed by the district. So they conduct an independent determination of compliance on top of what the district. So in total, compliance is evaluated, or was evaluated, across 67 unique indicators in 2021-22. The percentage of indicators for each district that was found in compliance is provided in the table that is shown in the middle of page 2 for that report. So when you look at all the indicators, 4 of 6 districts were compliant at or above 90% across all of those indicators. So the final table in the report identifies specific indicators that were found out of compliance most commonly among those 6 districts that underwent a file review in school year 2020-21. So there were a couple indicators that were out of compliance among half or more of those districts. For example, you can see in that table that there's an indicator 200.800.A, which is a transition-related indicator, and 4 districts were found out of compliance on that one. It is probably important to note that the 200.180.B indicator, which pertains to initial evaluation timelines, those were results, per what I understand from Susan Henry, were impacted by some confusion around whether school closures in school year 2021 represented an acceptable delay reason for initial evaluations. So it's probably not a surprise that most of the districts were out of compliance on that indicator. Districts, once they go through this file review process, are required to develop corrective action plans for each instance of noncompliance. The final two indicators there represent on-time IEP processes. So the first one is annual IEPs, or the extent to which annual IEPs were held by due date. We have not met the 95% target over 3 years, but performance here has improved and is approaching the 95% target as of this year. The final indicator is for on-time IEP processes with respect to initial evaluations. We did meet the 99% target there in 2020. 2020 was the year that I just mentioned, where there was misunderstanding about acceptable delay reasons, and then we are approaching the 99% target as of 2020. Next slide, please. So the final report here is transportation. So my colleague Carla worked with Kenny Mulder, the Director of Transportation, and Robin Ray, who's the Transportation Manager, on compiling this report. The first indicator reflects on-time bus arrivals, and that 98% target there has been met in each of the last 3 years. The second and third indicators connect to the ability to adequately staff the program. So we focus on this indicator because obviously inadequate staffing can lead to service discontinuities and transportation delays. So you can see there that maintaining staffing for transportation has been a struggle in recent years, given those percentage of days that their student attendance days, there were routes lacking a complete set of drivers or aides. Our hope there is that we'll be able to, more years of data and more years of typical data, we'll be able to establish performance targets moving forward for those. The final indicator is the number of elementary school students on routes exceeding 60 minutes in duration. So this is based on the October reporting period of the schools represented there. I believe this mirrors a proposed district KPI. There were fewer students experiencing long rides in 2020 and 21 in comparison to 2019. So this is another one we're moving forward. We hope to establish more concrete performance targets that the program continues to. What questions do you have?
I had a quick question, just because I'm trying to figure out why there's such a large difference in the numbers. On page 4, committee participant survey, guessing the ends are the numbers, right?
That's the number of surveys.
Right. Why 22 you had 29 surveys, 21 you had 29 surveys, 2020 you had 77. Why is this such a large difference?
So that can be attributed to the number of programs we are reviewing within the year. Sometimes, like, for example, when we do a K-12 type of program, we would have more teachers present than if it was just a K-5 program or a 9-12 program. You would have twice as many teachers be a part of the committee. So it kind of depends on which curriculum we're reviewing that particular year as to how many.
21 and 22 were the same numbers, and all of a sudden I looked, that's why 2020 just stood out.
Yeah. 2020 we did more curriculum committees than we have the other two.
That makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Director Mullen, did you want to ask a question?
It was good.
He was dressed, okay.
Last on our work study meeting, we have Article 5, purchase of service overview.
Good evening, Vice President Foxcroft, Board of Directors, and Dr. Keenan. I'm Wendy Kindergarten, Chief Academic Officer for the district. We'll be discussing tonight our purchase of service updates, and then our board meeting, June 24th, I will be bringing the contracts for asking for slide. What we've been doing this evening is just reviewing the procedures, reviewing our agency list, and then also talking about how we have partnered and continue to partner with our multiple agencies that we have. Next slide. So if you look at this, knowing that children that need to receive purchase of service is a private, separate placement that is through the IEP process. So that identifies the process that we use once the IEP team decides that a child may need extensive therapeutic needs or other therapies that we don't offer in our public schools that we would need to be accessing our private agencies. Next slide. Once we receive the information from the student, our directors, our coordinator is sitting at the IEPs. They exchange information with our special education coordinators. They talk with our building principals. We really understand and get a profile for the student and what the student needs. So then we consider the geographic location, knowing that we provide services throughout St. Louis County. Some of our agencies are in certain areas. It would not make sense for transportation to possibly a child that lives north to pick a program that was in the south. However, it's most important that we make sure that we pick the agencies that the child needs the most. That's what drives service, but we also look at location. We also look at the services that they specialize in, identify the characteristics, the staff-to-student ratio, if there's a need for staff-to-student ratio. All of our agencies right now currently support either middle school to high school or K to high school plus 12, which would be students that are 21. And then we also want to really look at the counseling and the therapeutic needs of the students in order to make sure that they're addressed with our purchase of service agency. Slide. This is a graph that shows the agencies that we currently partner with. I'd like to draw your attention to the two new agencies that we partnered with this year, which was HW-KIA. When we originally approached you, it was Annie Malone. It had since changed names, and that's why it is HW-KIA Academy, Annie Malone. We currently have 3 students there. We also have a contract with JTC Academy, and they are located in Cahokia, Illinois. We currently have 4 students there, so that's a new venture that we're going into. And then, of course, our other agencies that we have supported. 84 students total are currently in purchase of service. Next slide. Some of the partnering that we do, it's important that we stay on track with our purchase of service agencies, that we share information, we share our knowledge as well as they share their knowledge with us. We have directors meetings where we meet at least quarterly. We've had Matt Glazer and Molly Bolton's group, Dr. Bolton's group, work with our coordinators in our purchase of service to focus on assessment and the rigor and the instruction and learning going on in the environment. We have agency directors meetings in consultation where actually prior to there was little communication amongst our agency directors, and now they've actually started communicating with each other to help support students and families throughout the district. And then, of course, we're continually sharing resources with our families and each other. Next slide. We use multiple indicators in order to evaluate our program. For the first time, we added JTC Academy. We really wanted to go through the process and vet the process of following the indicators so we can truly have a good measure when we partner. We don't want to partner with an agency that doesn't have our same core values or mission or vision, and also that meets our quality indicators for our student performance. So we use our social emotional indicators, checklists, making sure that they understand that they are to follow our board district policies and procedures, and sometimes that is difficult because some of those agencies deal with multiple different districts. So we make sure that we have a presence and that they understand and we train them on policies and procedures. And also that our students, we want to be able to compare them. You've heard earlier about the assessment data. We want to make sure that our students are learning and receiving the supports that they need, so they also follow our assessment data as well. Next slide. Questions?
I thought we were going, maybe, I thought we were looking at one in Edwardsville.
So, funny you say that, because JTC has 2 locations.
That's when you say Cahokia.
Yes, JTC has 2 locations. If one of their programs, they consider that Cahokia, one of they consider Edwardsville, so.
Which one are we utilizing, or which one are we thinking?
We actually utilize both.
Okay.
So one is a building that has
supports students for autism, and one is a building that supports students with significant social, emotional, and behavioral.
I thought that was the one in Cahokia.
I think that's the one in Cahokia, and then there's, they call them JTC North and South, or East and West, but.
One is primarily for children with autism,
Yes,
and the other one is for children with behavioral difficulties, many times with the BD element.
yes. The program that we are utilizing right now is for the students that have autism or experience difficulties with autism or behavior disabilities. We are currently on the waiting list for a student with a social emotional. Yes, and they are current, providing you guys resources of the increases in contract, purchase of service. In our meetings have also discussed they are on the receiving end of very similar situations that we are, not being able to find staff, having to increase the salaries, having to increase some of the tuition amounts, having to look at things differently when you're providing staff support to our students. That could be reflective in the Exhibit A that I provided to you also. Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
May I make the motion to adjourn, please?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we will. Oh,